you, Chris. Good morning, everybody. My name is Leah Dail, and I'm an Extension Master Gardener volunteer here in Wake County. I've been a Master Gardener since 2012, and a couple of disclaimers before I start. Well, I came by gardening very naturally. I have grandparents that gardened and farmed, and my mother was actually a Master Gardener. She took the class, she didn't do the volunteering, but she was an Uber volunteer here at the Arboretum. So I came by gardening throughout my life and love it, but I would not consider myself, I guess I've got a microphone, a weed expert. So if you're expecting to learn anything and everything you need to know about weeds, you may want to go ahead and leave now, because I'm not going to be able to do that. Also, as I started studying the topic, it is so vast. So I think there are probably lots of courses at NC State on weeds. So let's cover the high points and give you some resources for getting more information. The other disclaimer is that my husband laughed when I told him the name of this lecture, because I have lots and lots of weeds in my yard. And so I told him, well, you have to grow them to know them. So that makes me an expert. So is this click it? No, that's a pointer. There we go. All right, so a definition of a weed. It's a noun, plural is weeds, and it's a wild plant that's growing where it's not wanted. So, and it's in competition with your cultivated plant. It can also just be any plant that's growing where you don't want it. I have my crepe myrtles send out suckers, and so they're growing throughout my beds, and I consider that a weed because I don't want them there. Some of them are really easy to ID because they have some really bad attributes, like poison ivy there on the left. But some, my weed may be your beautiful plant. Some people like to have dandelions because they have pretty yellow flowers and they have the puffballs that kids can play with. So it can be up to interpretation. And there are some benefits. So you may not want to eradicate all of your weeds, or try to. And it's a fallacy to think that you're going to get rid of all of them. Let's make that clear from the very beginning. There are some edible weeds that you can eat, violets, chickweed, dandelions. They add some fertilizing elements to your soil, like nitrogen from vetch and clover. And one of the big things is they are food for pollinators. Lots of native bees and beneficial insects feed off of them. And some of our first spring weeds are a really great food source for those early pollinators. So if it's possible to leave an area of your yard that's naturalized and has some weeds, you may want to think about doing that in order to sustain some of the native populations that we have of pollinators. So in order to get rid of the weeds that you want to get rid of, you need to understand some things about them. First is how they grow. And we break weeds down into 4 different life cycles. You've got your winter annuals, your summer annuals, biennials, and perennials. But here in North Carolina, where we live, because we have such temperate winters often, a lot of weeds that in some places would be a biennial or even an annual are actually perennials because they are with us year-round. So let's talk about the life cycle of the summer annual. So we're going to start in the middle when it's a seed, and in the spring that seed germinates, turns into a seedling. Follow the arrows around. The plant grows, it flowers, those flowers set seeds, and then it dies in the fall. But you've got the seeds that continue the cycle back again in the spring. And so let's talk about some of our favorite summer annual weeds. Crabgrass. It's one of the banes of a lot of lawn lovers. That would not be me, that would be my husband. It germinates in early summer, and one of the things that I wanted to tell you too is I'm not going to go over specific chemical ways to get rid of weeds, because that's very, very specific. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And there are some great resources. Whenever you're going to use any kind of herbicides, you need to know exactly what you're using. You need to, we'll talk about this later, but you need to know why you're using it, what you're using it on, and how to use it and use it properly. And that's just too broad a topic to try and get into specifics. But the different species have different amount of hair on it. So, and you can see that on different ones. But lots of different kind of crabgrasses that you'll see as a summer annual. Stiltgrass. Anybody run across this one? Yeah. In my research, I found out it's been in the U.S. since about the beginning of the last century. I think it came in as packing material. It grows in Asian countries. And the biggest problem with this plant is, and this is the case for lots of weeds. Weeds have evolved so that they grow in really poor conditions and they reproduce incredibly quickly. So the Japanese stiltgrass, one plant can have almost 500,000 seeds on it. We are up against something really big when the numbers are skewed against us like that. And they stay viable in the soil for up to 5 years. So even if you're pulling it out this year, you can have it still come back 5 years from now. Plus it may blow in or come in from birds and other animals as well. It germinates before the crabgrass, so it's going to be one of the first things that you see. And it can get pretty tall, up to 3 feet. You see it in a lot of woodland areas, but it also can be found in your grass. Lambsquarter. This is something that I've seen on the sides of the road, but I don't have it actually in my yard. It's one of the few weeds here that I don't have. Again, a summer annual. And morning glory. This germinates in late spring. Now, one of the things about this, I told you some of the weeds here are great pollinator plants. This is a great pollinator for some bees and butterflies. So it's kind of hard to think about getting rid of it. Plus it's pretty. But once it establishes, it is really, really hard to eradicate. So if you know you don't want it, start early and start pulling. Pigweed. This is something that can get really tall as well and grows so fast. And it talks about how these plants have evolved to make it. So this plant can grow up to 1 inch a day. I have a lot growing 1 inch today in my yard. Another thing with weeds is they've also adapted to our conditions here. So the heat doesn't bother it. No rain doesn't bother it. And this is another one that has a huge seed production. So, and this is a real problem in fields according to my research. So let's move on to winter annuals. Now this is a tricky weed because it's actually, the seed falls and it starts to germinate in the fall, even though you're not going to see it until the spring. So actually, I think my research said that 80% of the seeds are germinating between September and November, and it's starting to do its thing underground. But then it's not going to be until the fall they have the seedling and the flowers, and then it's going to die in the summer. So the nice thing is, if you see them by late spring when it's starting to get really warm, these guys are going to die off, but their seeds have probably already gone into the soil, and you're going to see them again the next year. So here's one that's a winter annual, bitter crest, and it likes shaded environments. It has that basal rosette of leaves and produces a stalk with white flowers on it. And this is one, I don't remember the term right now, but when you touch the seed pods, they explode and can go out like 3 to 6 feet, which is kind of cool to see. But then when you realize that you have just released that many more seeds into your environment, it's kind of daunting. So one of the keys to management of weeds is to get them before they produce seeds, and so that those seeds aren't going to go out into your landscape. Hanbin, this is something that I think most of us have seen. It's often confused with purple dead nettle. They look very, very similar. They're both in the mint family, so they have a 4-sided square stem. Very prolific growers. Hanbin and purple dead nettle both are a great plant for early pollinators. And we have a lot of native bee populations that use a lot of these weeds. So, it's another one of those. If you have a place where you can leave a little bit of it, that would be great, but then keeping it in check is an issue as well. Vetches. These are kind of nasty in that they are really hard to get rid of, and they are a problem in fields as well. It's got these tendrils that come out of the end, and so it'll grow up as a vine, and basically you can't hand pull these. A lot of these weeds that are tough to get out, if you hand pull them and it breaks off, you think, oh well, I got rid of it. You probably didn't. It's going to re-sprout from that broken stem, and this is one that will definitely do that. Chickweed. Anybody ever see chickweed in your yard? Yay. A house that we lived in, we had a back patio, and it loved coming up between the bricks, and I hated it. And one year my brother-in-law wanted to come over and pick our chickweed because they made some kind of, it's got medicinal qualities, and so they made a tincture with the chickweed. I'm like, please come every day and pick the chickweed. He doesn't do that anymore, unfortunately. But it spreads. And another, I'll throw this in right here, another way to get rid or to keep weeds at bay in your lawn is to have really lush, dense lawn, if that's what you want. But shading out these weeds is really important, and a lot of these that are low growing, like the chickweed, when you mow, you're not eradicating them at all. They are still there because they are low growing and spreading out. The nice thing about chickweed, it's kind of a satisfying weed to get rid of when you pull it, because it's got a really weak and shallow root system, and it pulls out, and it grows out from a central, I don't know what that's called botanically, but whatever that middle part is. And so you pull it out and you get a lot at one time. So I like to do that when I do weed. And they have white flowers. There's also a mouse ear chickweed that's a little bit of a darker green and has fuzzy leaves on it. We have that in our areas too. Bluegrass. Anybody ever seen this in your yard? Yeah. It's really easy to identify. It has, they call it prow-shaped leaf tips. It's supposed to look like the prow of a boat. Light green and comes up pretty early. And those are the seed heads there at the top on the right. So, well, actually, on the bottom too. But again, you want to get rid of that before those seeds start to disperse. Carolina geranium, another winter annual. Another thing, one of the reasons you want to know your weed and know exactly what it is the only way to get rid of them, if you're going to use chemical control, is to know its life cycle, because with this hard seed coat on the geranium, you're not going to, that herbicide is not going to penetrate there. So you need to know when to spray or do any of those kind of controls. And then it has a seed pod that looks like a crane's bill, so it's often called a crane's bill geranium. These naturalize really well in woody areas, and again, a great pollinator plant. So one that if you want to keep it, some people actually grow it on purpose. That's what I can tell people. I'm growing it on purpose. Then we have biennial weeds. And so it has two different seasons of growth. The first season up on the top right, you've got the seed that germinates into a seedling, and then it overwinters as a rosette. You'll see that in the soil. No flower, no plant that's going to have seed yet. So the second season, the spring, it's going to grow the flowers, set the seed, and then that plant will die, but those seeds that it's set are going to be in the ground to start over again. So you're really only going to see the plant itself really in that second season. So here's some biennial weeds that we see in North Carolina or in this area. Thistles, that's a musk thistle, and then Queen Anne's lace. The thistles, again, a pollinator plant. The flower is a great pollinator for bees here in North Carolina. And the Queen Anne's lace is actually, it's beautiful and you see it everywhere, but that's because it's actually categorized as an invasive species here in North Carolina. It's in the carrot family, so some people actually do use the roots as a carrot-like product for eating. You can actually batter the flower head and fry them if you'd like. There's lots of food available on the roadside. Although I have to caution you, there was a in our Master Gardener handbook, they talk about edible herbs, weeds, excuse me. You have to be really careful where you get your weeds that you're going to be eating if you choose to do that, because on a roadside they have probably been sprayed, plus you've got all the fumes and noxious things that come from all the traffic going by. So be super careful if you're going to decide to eat any of your weeds. Know where they come from, what their provenance might be. All right, and then here we have our perennial weeds. And like I said, a lot of weeds here in our area are actually perennials because we just don't have the cold, hard freezes that would completely kill them back. So starting in the middle there with the seed, it's going to grow into a seedling. It's going to grow its flowers down below, and over to the left, it's going to set its seeds and grow new plants. And then it overwinters, and you can see it's there under the soil, just hanging out until it gets warm enough, and it's going to start growing again. Also, while it's overwintering, it's actually making space for itself and growing out. So these things, a lot of perennial weeds grow so quickly and spread both through seeds and rhizomes and roots. Also want to mention Dr. Neil here at NC State, and this is Dr. Wan. I'm not familiar, he's a professor emeritus, but the slides, the cycles came from him. He was gracious enough to share those with the Master Gardeners after he lectured with us one time, so I appreciate that because I would not have been able to duplicate those graphics. So here are some perennial weeds. Dog fennel. It can grow up to 3 feet tall, really big, and this is one where if you try and pull it out, it's kind of tough to do, and you'll oftentimes break off the stem and think, yay, I got rid of it, but no, you didn't, because it's just going to re-sprout. The stems actually become pretty tough as it gets older and bigger, and when you pull it, you'll find that there's a kind of a musty odor to the plant. So there you go. Dallas grass. This is oftentimes it can be useful in fields, not cultivated crops, but where animals are grazing because it is a food source for them. It grows really quickly and can grow really tall, but the problem is in the fields, and I found this to be fascinating, it can get a fungus that when cattle eat it, they get, let me find the name of it because I want to get it right. Hold on just one quick sec. They start stumbling around, which is not funny, but it's interesting to me. Dallas grass staggers, which doesn't actually harm the cattle, but the problem is if they fall and hurt themselves, then that's an issue. But this is the part that I found really fascinating. This same fungus can grow in other grasses, and back in the 1600s, when people in the U.S. ate a lot of bread flour made from cereal rye, it could also get the same fungus. And so there's speculation that this fungus caused some of the symptoms that people thought was symptoms of witch. So Salem witch trials may have some connection to the fungus that grows on this grass. Isn't that kind of cool? I thought it was. But this was pretty easy to identify because it grows up tall, taller than a lot of your other grasses, so you'll be able to see that. The Indian mock strawberry. We also have a wild strawberry that's very similar. The Indian mock strawberry has a yellow flower, and our native wild strawberry has a white flower. That's one way to identify the two different ones. The Indian mock strawberry, they actually do put on a fruit. It looks like a strawberry, just a little miniature one. The Indian mock strawberry is not supposed to taste like anything, pretty bland. Our wild strawberries actually do have a little bit of a strawberry taste to them. It would take an awful lot to make jam, but there you go. But again, this is another good plant for pollinators. Violets, wild violets. Anybody have those in your yard? Yeah, I started with a couple that I thought were really, really pretty. And guess what they do? They invite all their family to come and live with them. And they're pretty tough. They've got these really thick rhizomes that you have to dig out. And they're attached to the next plant, So it's quite the task to try and get rid of them. They oftentimes are this purple color, but they also can be white or yellow. All the same thing, wild violets. They like shade, but they also grow in full sun, as my yard will contribute. So we know some of these weeds. What are we going to do to get rid of them? So we, in Extension, suggest that you have a management plan. And again, the word management, eradication is just not going to happen. They blow in, like I said, they are introduced by animals and birds. So we're not ever going to be free of weeds unless you have some kind of biodome. So what you want to do is to identify your weed. I've only listed a handful, and I understand that some of you brought some weeds. We're going to have to rely on lots of you to help identify them because I'm not an expert on identification. But there are resources on the internet as well. You can Google weed pictures, and there's some websites that will help you do that. Once you identify your weed, though, I would highly recommend that you come to turf files or other extension resources to get accurate information on what to do with that weed, if anything. Like I said, you need to know their life cycles, understand how they reproduce and spread, and then look at some of your management options. And in Extension, we really recommend that you use an integrated pest management process. So first of all, you want to monitor the situation. And that means just looking and seeing what's going on and how much of the weed situation you have going. And decide if at what point you want to take steps to do something about it. Second of all, you want to identify them and make sure you know exactly what you're dealing with. And that, again, includes what is their life cycle, when's the best time to treat them and do anything with them, what is the best way to eradicate them if you can. Assess your situation. Again, this is, they call it a threshold. What is your threshold for this particular weed or pest? If you're like me and you're kind of a laid-back gardener, you're going to have a higher tolerance because I'm looking at the work versus it's green, it's pretty sometimes. But then there are going to be some gardeners, and I go to their yards and I'm just amazed because their threshold is much lower, or they have a lot more time than I do, and they have less weeds. Then number 4, you implement your steps. And then this is really important and something that you don't often think about. Go back and evaluate. How did that work? Because as we all know, gardening is not a tried and true art form. Well, it is an art form. It's not. There is science, but I think there's definitely an art form. So it may be the time of day that you did an herbicide application. You could be wrong on the timing of this weed or the identification of the weed. So you want to go back and make sure if what you've done has worked, or if it hasn't, what steps you might take to go back to number 1 and remonitor. And this is a continual cycle. And also, integrated pest management means working all of these things together. And we're going to go through some of the steps in a minute, but it's not one thing that's actually going to always work, or the only one thing that you're going to do. So different management practices, cultural. You want to, first of all, limit how many weeds come into your landscape. So you want to limit the introduction, reproduction, and survival of weeds in your area. So you want to make sure you're picking the right plant for the right place. A weak plant is going to be more susceptible to pests, both weeds and insects and diseases. Transplants often don't have as many weeds with them as seeds because oftentimes weed seed is mixed in with other seeds, unfortunately. Along with the right plant in the right place, make sure you're spacing it correctly, watering it, and taking care of it. Compost and cover crops are listed there. Mulch also falls under that. Mulch is a great way to combat a lot of weeds because weed seed needs light to generate most of them, and so if you have covered them up and they're not able to have light, they're not going to grow. avoiding weedy plants if possible, and sanitation, making sure you're not spreading those weeds around your landscape or the weed seeds. And yes, this is me in the garden. Mechanical management. There she is with her trusty wheelbarrow and her tools, because sometimes it takes digging. It takes making some barriers, putting, like I said, compost down, but it's you working in the garden to make sure that those weeds are gone. Biological management. I did not find a lot of information about biological ways of controlling weeds, but you're going to introduce beneficial living organisms to do that. A lot of times we talk about that with pests, but those are the kinds of things that you can introduce. The nice thing about them is they're relatively safe in it. They're pretty low impact on your environment. And then down the I don't know if I'd call it a hierarchy, but the chain of ways that you want to try and manage weeds is chemical management. So this, for us, master gardeners, we're not anti-herbicides or pesticides. It's we want you to make sure that you're using the right product for the right problem and using it correctly. I can't stress that enough, that you need to read the labels. It's really, really small writing, and it's a lot of these things. You pull out this long little brochure that they've spent lots of time putting together for you, so you need to read it, make those writers feel proud. If you're not a person that is going to be really meticulous about following directions, and I'm going to go ahead and admit that I'm not really great at that, you know. I'm one of those people when I bake, like, oh, a little bit of sugar is good. Oh, maybe a little bit more would be even better. Don't do that when you're talking about chemicals. These things are toxic, they kill things, and we don't want to harm the environment or you. So if you're not the one that's going to read those labels, find somebody who will and help you with it. My husband is that guy. He's an engineer, and that's his thing. So that whole shelf is all his. He gets to play with those under my direction and supervision, of course, but make sure you're using it right, properly. And so the right herbicide, the right plant, the right herbicide, the right time, and the right dosage. The timing is really key. Again, know that life cycle, research your actual weed that you want to target, and make sure that you're using it at the time that's going to be most effective. Otherwise, you're just wasting money and time. So there are two different kinds of herbicides. A contact herbicide that is only going to affect the part of the plant that the herbicide comes in contact with. Then you have systemic herbicides that actually get taken up by the plant and go to their growing system through the vascular system, and it's going to inhibit or prevent their growth. So again, using these integrated pest management approaches is for long-term management. It's not a one-shot deal. It's something that you're probably going to do over time and go back and look at again and again. There are some amazing resources through NC State. The Department of Horticulture has a website that has weed control and management stuff. That's there on that very first link. The North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Sciences also has a noxious weed list that you can look at. I can't say enough about turf files, which is here at NC State. Once you know your weed, you can search it in their database, and it gives you all sorts of information. And that's where you need to go if you're thinking about some kind of chemical control. They're going to tell you what kind of the actual products to look for, the chemical names, so that you'll be able to search for that. Oftentimes you'll see products in gardening centers that say, list 100 different things that they're going to cover. We may only have one of those, and there may be a better product that targets that one weed that you're going to be looking at. And then our North Carolina Extension Master Gardener Handbook is actually online and is a great resource for finding out about any kind of gardening topic that you want. It's a beautiful book too if you want to buy the book, but online the version is great. And at the end of every chapter, and there's a chapter on anything having to do with gardening in North Carolina, but they have resources and there are links there so that you get, if you go to this resource page for weeds, then you could click those hyperlinks in the at the end of the chapter and go straight to those websites. And then one of your best resources too is us, the Extension Master Gardeners. We have a phone line where you can call us during the hours of 9 to 12 or 1 to 4 and ask us questions. We've got resources there in the office and can do our best to give you a research-based answer. If we can't get it right then, we will do lots of research, and we actually get questions on our Master Gardener email group that says, I got a question about this. Anybody have any information? So you may be talking to one Master Gardener on the phone, but you've got all 150 to 200 of us kind of at your fingertips there. You could also email us questions, and the nice thing about email is you can send pictures. So sometimes that helps with identification of any kind of problems or issues, or just a plant ID. So there you go. I have cards up here that have the contact information for us, and I also have soil test kits. Soil testing is free here in North Carolina. It goes to the agronomics lab here in Raleigh, and that's an awesome thing to do, and one of the things that we recommend that you do before you're doing pretty much anything in your yard. It's free up until around Thanksgiving, and from Thanksgiving till about April, there's a nominal fee for the soil test because the commercial farmers are using the lab to get their fields ready for the coming growing season. But then again in April it'll become free again to homeowners. We recommend that you do that probably about every 2 to 3 years so that you know what's going on in your soil, and you can test different areas of your yard depending on what's growing there so that you'll know more specifically what to do in order to take care of your yard. So I guess it's time for questions, and all of you expert Master Gardeners out there that can help me answer any questions, I would highly, highly be grateful, very grateful. Yes, ma'am.
The nutsedge. It's the bane of my existence. It looks like this. I've pulled till I'm tired of it. I've used this stuff that you spray on it that's for nutsedge. Pardon? No. It's upside down. Apparently you're supposed to pull it out with the nut attached. That hardly ever happens. I didn't have it. We turned our lawn into garden beds and 2 years ago, and since then this is just flooded everywhere. I bet I pulled it out completely at least 4 times this summer, and it's still covering everything. I don't know how to get rid of it.
Yeah.
I'm not a great weed person either, but I will say first when I identify if it's purple or yellow nutsedge, if you pick it really early, like when it's just a baby,
I think it's yellow.
it's going to have, well, and that will impact which chemical you choose.
Okay.
Whether it's purple or yellow. If you pick it when it's just a little tiny baby, it will be less likely to drop those nuts. So the earlier, when it's that big, it's going to spew the nuts into the soil, and you're going to have them come back. But try and get it really young if you're manually pulling it.
I've pulled it early, I've pulled it consistently. I've sprayed it with the stuff from Ortho that's for nutsedge in the yard, in the lawn. And 1 patch died, the other 15 just moved right along.
Is it something you could spot spray with glyphosate?
I could, I really hate to use Roundup,
But you're using another chemical?
It is another chemical. It's not supposed to, it's Ortho, it's not supposed to be as toxic as, and it's supposed to target
I think
nutsedge.
glyphosate's probably not any more toxic than that, and you could spot spray it. Pull it when it's tiny, spot spray it when it's bigger, or search for a chemical. You might have to have a landscaper come with a pesticide license with something that's a little stronger. Those are the main recommendations.
But I never see any nuts on the up. I never see any real nuts.
They'll come if you leave it long enough.
Oh no, this is just the tallest it's got. There's one spot I didn't get. That's why I brought it. So
The ones in my yard are just going to seed now.
Okay.
They don't, but they are putting out a lot of seed. I don't know if somebody else.
The certified applicators have a pre-emergent.
Pardon?
The certified applicators have a pre-emergent but it's quite a,
But
So
that's
an
not gonna
applicator
do
with
the nuts that are in
Preemergent?
the
no,
ground.
well, yeah, it gets them when they're before
The
they
seeds,
germinated,
yeah.
the seeds before they germinate.
She's
Which
saying
really
the professional
reduces-
applicators.
Oh, okay.
Which really improves situations, you have fewer to be concerned about. And when they're only about 2 inches in height, just that single blade type thing, those pull out with their roots. I've been finding them for years in a couple of different states.
Okay.
I'm finally pretty successful.
But see, I didn't have any, I don't think I had any 2 years ago, and now all my garden beds have it. I mean-
Invite her over to your house.
So a couple of words there. A pre-emergent herbicide is put out before the seeds germinate in order to prevent them from germinating. One of the problems with pre-emergence is it will kill any kind of seed. So if you are reseeding your lawn, there's a window where you wouldn't put that pre-emergent down prior to that because, again, your seed is not going to germinate. The post-emergents are the things that are going to contact your plants in some way. And then herbicides are graded here in North Carolina, probably other places, so that the ones that are sold commercially to us as a regular homeowner have certain concentrations of the chemicals. Higher concentrations, you have to have a license here in North Carolina in order to apply them. And so that's where you contract with a commercial landscaper or someone who has that certification in order to put stronger stuff down, if that's what you feel like you need to do. Yeah.
Different topic, when is mulch most effective? I'm a little bit confused. Do you put mulch, if you put it down in the fall, for the winter, the seeds are already in the ground. So are you supposed to put it down in the spring? When is putting mulch down most effective?
Is there a particular time of year? I mean, you always want to have mulch in your landscaping beds. I put it down in the spring to make it look prettier and freshen it up, and it's packed down, it's composted over the year. So I need to add more because it's actually becoming compost in my soil. So it should be there all the time, but I don't know that there's a particular time of year that you would actually, like it's better to put it out than
I guess
another.
my comment on that is basically what the mulch is doing is preventing the seeds from getting the light they need to germinate. So if you've got fall, the winter annuals, you probably want to put it down in the fall. If you've got spring annuals, you want to put it down in the spring.
Okay, so, because that's what I was wondering is, won't it just sprout in the mulch when the seeds fall on top of the mulch? Won't they just sprout in the mulch?
Yeah, if you haven't taken care of them by then, yeah. You want to cover them before they can germinate.
But you're right, if any new weed seed were to fall on top, it may germinate there in the mulch.
And the reading I've done has said you've got to have at least 4 inches. And I tend to go 2 to 3 because to save money. But what I'd read is that you really need to have at least a 4-inch good base to block the weeds.
But I have to add, if we don't really recommend 4 inches unless it's an area where you don't want anything to grow.
Okay.
If you put 4 inches around a tree, their roots can't.
Well, you
grow.
you don't put it at the tree anyway, though. But
Well, I mean, a lot of people will really load up their mulch,
Okay.
just
Yeah.
to keep every single last weed from germinating. But a super deep mulch like that will actually block the tree roots from breathing. And
Okay.
plant roots too. So 2 to 3 inches is a good amount.
Yeah.
I have a ton of crabgrass and this other weed that I wanted to identify. It looks like a carrot top. And you mentioned that Queen Anne's lace is in the carrot family. Is that correct? Is it? I don't see a flower on it, but.
So it may not be the Queen Anne's lace, but there could be something else. Do you have a sample of it? Okay. Yeah, that's something that, again, you could take a picture and email to us.
Yes.
And then we can try and help you identify it that way. But I don't know off the top of my head. so there's a wild carrot weed, so it could be that. Maybe that's why the rabbits are in my yard. Yeah.
I just have a quick question because I have to leave too. But I have a lot of poison ivy in my yard, and I just lately started to be concerned about it because usually I don't go that far on my territory because it's sloping down. But I got chickens recently, and I let them roam, and they got it in there, and I got it on myself. So now I'm trying to figure out what would be the best way to eradicate it, and I realized that basically everyone's saying it's pulling it. And because I don't want to use Roundup and any chemicals, because I worry that if my pets go around, they will just pick up everything. Because there may be some herbicides that just like fast removing from the soil, like I put it and in a week I know if they picked up something from the soil, it will be okay for them, for me eventually. And when is the best time to, I realize it's in the fall, right, to pull it out when it's not. And I wonder also, that only the leaves are poisonous, or if they start pulling
Everything.
All of it.
And don't burn it.
Don't burn.
Do not burn it.
Oh, no, I know, I won't burn it, yeah, I've already heard 100 times. But it's just like, what would be maybe some herbicides someone used beside those super chemicals ones to kind of.
Let me, I have an alternative. We won't spray chemicals in our yard, but I have this, it's called a Roundup stick. It's a tube that you can put the Roundup in and just take it to touch a leaf on it, and that will be, so you're not doing widespread or
I
you're
heard
very
you can
targeted.
pop them and go individually and like paint it, but I was like, this is a long work.
It is.
Well, that's why the stick thing that we bought. You just go and touch it like that, and so you're targeting and extremely limiting the amount that you put out there.
And I'm curious how people even cut it, because it's very not that dense or strong. And I cannot go there with a mower, so would I get just like I don't know, big scissors or trimmer?
Pruner.
Pruner.
But wash it off.
Yeah, you're gonna need to clean any of the implements that you use.
Yeah.
That oil for the plant is good.
Yeah. And you can actually buy pruner, it's a little thing you attach to a pruner that squirts a little bit of glyphosate out. And I use glyphosate instead of Roundup because Roundup, the name Roundup has been sold and is used for other products now. So really the active ingredient in the old Roundup was glyphosate. And that's what you want to, you can buy I don't know, it's like a little bottle I think that attaches to your pruners.
Okay.
So you can just make those cuts on the poison ivy and it will automatically give it a little
Okay,
squirt.
that seems like
But painting it is good too, like
okay. Thank you.
You didn't mention kudzu, is it because it's just impossible?
Kudzu, yeah, that, a lot of what our weeds to us now were introduced to our landscapes for what people thought were good reasons, and kudzu was used for erosion control. But it is really, really difficult to eradicate, and animals won't graze on it, so it kind of has its way. That's another thing that's probably going to take a contact herbicide or something to get rid of. Again, check turf files and see what they recommend, but I don't have any direct experience with it except for looking at it on the roadside as it grows up over trees.
The DOT uses goats.
Do goats actually eat it? Okay, I didn't think that any animals did.
And you can make jelly out of the blossoms.
There you go.
I didn't hear that, I didn't hear that.
You can make jelly out of the blossoms, so.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, you'll be back.
Incorporate a cardboard over an area once you, because I hate plastic, I mean, I know that it chokes out roots and everything, but I was just wondering if that works, like once you weed an area, you put cardboard down.
You can if you know that you're not gonna want to plant anything else. I mean, because you're not gonna be able to, it'd be difficult to dig through that cardboard. It's the same idea as landscape fabric. I use that in the paths in my vegetable garden. and then mulch over it, and it's an effective way to, again, prohibit the seeds from germinating. Yeah.
4 layers of newspaper works, and the newspaper will break down into your soil.
Yeah, and the cardboard will eventually break down. Any other questions? Marilyn brought some weeds, her favorites from her yard. And I think there's some that a lot of us have. Do you want to show them real quickly? Because I think they're things that people may have. Because the weed ID is the first step to knowing what to do with these.
Okay, Leah mentioned the Japanese stiltgrass, and so I do have a sample of that. And so let me pull out the bag. I did bring like 5 different ones. I walked into my vegetable garden this morning with the intent to bring 3, and I decided to bring 5 different of my Maryland's most hated weeds. Yeah, I have that one. Okay, so this is Japanese stiltgrass. Would you like to see what it looks like? Okay.
Mine's always.
Yes, I did.
Stiltgrass.
Right, okay. This is actually sold commercially as a ground cover. It's Creeping Charlie, ground ivy, and I do have a technical name for it written down if you're interested. It's become so invasive, it's taken over what used to be a lawn. So, and everywhere. It's taken over vegetable garden. It's taken over vegetable garden, it's taken over lawn. It's a shade. It likes wet shade. And we put down newspapers to keep mulch down. It will stay under that, it will root under that, it will spread, it spreads forever. So interesting that this is an edible plant according to the internet, and it's a member of the mint family, and people use it in salads. But just so that's what it is. I don't think I'll pass this around, but it's up here if you want to take a closer look. It's Creeping Charlie, ground ivy, and I do have a name for it that we'll pull that out later. Okay, this is now closed up. Originally, I thought when it first started, I have locust trees in my area. It is not. It's called chamber bitter, mimosa weed, and it is one of the hardest things to get rid of. It keeps coming back. And we hand pull, but it just keeps coming back and back. And now it's pretty much taken over the vegetable garden, along with the Creeping Charlie.
Is that a yellow blossom? Does it have a yellow blossom?
I try never to let it The idea is to get it before it puts out any flowers. So you need to get in there and hand pull it out. So yeah, mimosa, weed, chamber bitter. Let's pass that around so people can see what that looks like. It has closed up. I think I have more than one that you can pass around. Okay. Let's see.
Oh, yeah.
Before we get, so I have, where's this is what Chris identified as mulberry. This is another one. This is like, I don't hate it as much as Creeping Charlie and Japanese stiltgrass, but it's up there. There's a bigger sample of it.
Marilyn, that mulberry will start producing seeds when it's about 1.5 to 2 inches tall. So
Why is it so pervasive this year? This year mine has just exploded.
This year it's really dry.
But again, these weeds are all prolific seed bearers, so they will probably get a few. They have all these seeds. You're just going to keep getting more and more. So I would imagine next year it's
They call it Dail.
Day flower is all that I know.
Flower puts out a pretty little flower, and it spreads like crazy. Now, these are all part of the plants that grow by rhizomes. What's it called?
She's pretty with day flower.
And what is
Okay, I'm calling this one mulberry. Mulberry weed. Have that all over. Get it before it goes to seed.
It's not spurred.
I need some. Great. Crest, you know what, somebody just handed, this is not one of my weeds.
Well, that's a little euphorbia. That's awful.
Okay.
That's a euphorbia?
Yeah.
Okay. Not a good euphorbia.
This is the one I
think that's right.
I think that's right. Yeah, I don't know what this is.
It's a type of euphorbia.
This one's really annoying.
And that's the one, if you touch it, it automatically spreads it.
Which one?
The last one is the jasper.
I've never seen the seed, I've never looked that closely on it, but it has them.
Oh, yeah. Somebody told me one time you should, instead of handling it, just spray it.
It's very difficult to handle.
Yeah, once you try to pull it in.
Probably. Okay, it's getting a little noisy, but I think we have one more question from Marilyn in the back.
Actually, it's not a question, it's just a comment, a control technique that most people don't, a lot of people don't know about, but I have found really useful. I have some large areas in a wooded area where every summer I was battling Japanese stiltgrass. It blew in with Hurricane Fran and got worse every year and then spread everywhere. And every winter I was battling all kinds of chickweeds and henbits and all of that in the winter time there. And I tried hand pulling, and I can't spend them, 3 months out there doing that. And I tried Roundup and would rather not be doing that. So I got a flame torch. And the caveat is you can only use it after a real heavy rain, like an inch or more. Otherwise, you're going to burn down your yard. If you use it after a real heavy rain, you want to use it when it's not windy, obviously. So for me, it's first thing in the morning after a heavy rain.
Wow.
And it doesn't kill the root.
And you don't have to scorch and fry things, you just need to wilt them. It's really effective with Japanese stiltgrass and chickweed. It does not do well with perennial weeds. Crabgrass, if it's really young, like in the cracks in your driveway, when it first starts to show, it'll control that. But once the crabgrass gets established, there's too much energy in the roots, it'll come back. But it's really effective, and one of the reasons I think, and I'm supposing, because I was doing that Roundup for years, and the stuff got more and more and more every year, even though I was doing it before it supposedly went to seed. I think it's burning some of the seeds in the soil, I think, because since I've been doing the flaming, I have less and less and less. I almost had no stiltgrass in this area this year, which used to just be an area bigger than this room that was just covered with stiltgrass. So it's been really effective for me for some of those annual weeds, but obviously you don't want to do it near anything you want to save because the heat, will scorch anything.
Yeah, I'd like to offer an alternative, which is all the things that she said, and I agree, a torch can be good, but it's a little bit scary, is acetic acid, which is essentially vinegar, but you can buy it at a stronger mix, a stronger concentration, and at 20 or 30%. 20% is supposed to be 15 or 20%, plenty strong enough to burn weeds. You won't kill perennials, roots, but you will burn back the foliage. And I use it in the summer. I spray it on a hot day, and it will burn foliage back. I will say you have to be very careful about not getting it in your eyes or breathing it in because it is stronger than vinegar and it will burn your human tissue. So you don't, maybe you get one of those pump sprayers that's further away, or you wear a little respirator, make sure you have some glasses on, but it's really effective.
On that note, I have actually used just regular vinegar, but you can make a mix of a little bit of dish soap, which helps it stick to the leaf of the plant so it coats it better. And I think you can add salt as well. Just a little bit.
Don't add salt to your
but a little bit of soap will make it more effective.
Yeah, and that will burn down weeds. On a hot day, that'll burn them down. It won't kill the roots. But you can sweep through and do a lot of burning.
Where do you find the high concentration of acetic acid?
Well, it's some ag supply stores will have it, some nurseries.
You can order it online, but you do be sure to dilute it.
So the flamethrower and solarization are two management techniques that I didn't add in here because solarization it has to be done well for it to work. It's a tricky kind of thing. So if you're interested, that's covering things in a plastic that will heat up, using the heat to kill the weeds and the seeds. And the flamethrower I thought was a little risky to throw out there just to anybody. So, my 14-year-old son would think that would be great. And something that Gina mentioned, the vapors and everything, anytime you're spraying anything, there's going to be a drift of some of the droplets. So when you're spraying any kind of the chemicals, you need to be super careful that you're doing it on a low wind day, using either cardboard or plastic milk jugs or something so that you localize where it's being sprayed, and being careful, you may want to wear a mask so that you're not inhaling any of this, because again, you're talking about noxious chemicals that we don't know what they're doing, so use them with care, and gloves, definitely gloves. I think we're out of time, but if anybody has any other questions, come on up afterwards.
I'm going to add a couple of things if I can about Stiltgrass. That is, Stiltgrass's flowering season is approaching. So want to get rid of the seeds, now's the time to go ahead and get rid of the plant. So go home, do that now. Also, it is very sensitive to chemicals. You don't need to use them at full strength for Stiltgrass. I think I've heard as low as 10% for Roundup. You can use that, and a lot of other plants probably survived that spraying, so you don't have to use it anywhere near as strong, and it'll wipe it right out. Of course, you'll have any seeds left over, as we learned, 3 to 5 years, and you can get the population down quite a bit. I have it in my backyard, and between just a little bit of spraying and putting on my extra leaves, has gotten rid of most of it back there.
Since you help identify the type of euphorbia it is, it's spotted spurge.
Yeah, spotted spurge, there you go. Thanks, Leah, appreciate it.